So today I'm going to talk to you about the stages of reading development and everything that has to go with it. So the first stage is called the pre-reader stage. The readers in this stage know fewer than 40 uppercase and lowercase letters. These children often lack concepts of print such as left to right tracking and the difference between a letter and a word. Most of these readers need help learning how to write their first name, especially with the correct letter formation. A lot of these students can learn letters and sounds by reading and writing, not just going over them. So, a way to assess the pre-readers um, is a letter sound assessment. And this is the only assessment you need for planning pre-A lessons. So, this assessment will tell you which letters and sounds students know and which ones you need to teach. It is important to show these students an alphabet chart in which the letters are out of sequence. Point to each letter and ask the students to say the letter name. And then you can also highlight the letters so the students identify the letter and sound. It's important to update these weekly so the student knows all the letters and sounds. So after you're done with that assessment, you can decide how to use it to determine which letters and sounds to teach in your lessons. And after this, you can form groups. You can form your guided reading groups based off the results of the letter sound assessment, and this can have three or four students. After you're done with that, you can select a text and materials. During the lesson, children will read a book with you. It is important to remember that this book has engaging pictures for the students. So this is just a great way to keep the students engaged in your reading, and it just gets them more interested in the reading. So next, like I said, form groups and select a text, like I said, and then this down here is an example of the letter sound checklist that you would use with the pre-emergent readers. Next is the emergent reader. The profile of the emergent reader is this is designed for students reading text levels A through C. It also helps children build a foundation with letters and sounds, strategic actions, phonemic awareness, phonics, sight words, word solving, comprehension, and writing. Emergent readers read at level A and can write their first name without a model. They can identify at least 40 uppercase and lowercase letters, and they can demonstrate left to right directionally, and they can also understand enough English to follow simple directions and know at least 8 sounds. By the time children successfully read text at level C, they typically know all the letters and sounds. They can match one to one, and they can control left to right directionally across several lines of print. So when you're assessing an emergent reader, there are typically 4 assessments necessary to identify these readers' strengths and needs so you can select appropriate text to plan your guided reading lessons. The 4 assessments are letters and sounds, running records, dictated sequence, and sight words. So for letters and sounds, students should already know most of their letters and sounds from the pre-A lessons. So there are a few you can teach because some students may be behind in their letters and sounds. So you can show students the same chart that we used in the pre-A and which letters are out of sequence. So like we said in the pre-A, show them the alphabetic chart and have them show you which ones are out of sequence. You can point to each letter and ask students to say letter, name, and sound. There are a variety of different checklists you can use to summarize the student knowledge. And after you're done with that, you can check each week, um, and make sure you update the guided reading and update your chart so that you can just keep a closer eye on how their progress is going and how um, they're progressing throughout the year. The next assessment is running records. These are very valuable for emergent readers, but it's not the most important thing. Um, it's not. It's important not to put too much pressure on the text level. And for this stage in particular, it's pretty easy to take a running record because of the short passages that they are reading. And during these running records, it's very important to mark the errors, so then you know which or how they're why they're making those errors, and it's also important to figure out why they stopped and if they self-corrected, why they self-corrected. So when you find the text a student can read with a 90 to 94% accuracy, you have identified that student's instructional range, and that's what the running record is for. So after you're done with that, you with the running record, you analyze errors for meaning, structure, and visual information. So here we take a closer look at the errors that the students made. Obviously, since these passages are shorter, there won't be as many errors in the emergent reader stage. After the next assessment is the dictated sentence. And so for emergent readers, a dictated sentence is a quick and effective way to assess whether a child hears and records sounds in words. You can save a lot of time with this assessment by doing it to a group. So instead of doing it one-on-one, you can do it with a group of 4 or 5 or even 6 students. So an example of this would be like the sentence, "I like to eat oatmeal." And the skills assessed in this would be consonant and long vowels. And that is just an example of a dictated sentence and some of the skills that you will be assessing. The next and final assessment for the emergent reader is the sight words. And students write sight words that match their instructional text level. This will tell you which sight word students know well and which you should target in your lessons. This assessment is quick, easy, and useful. So those are the 4 assessments that would be used for emergent readers. After this, after you're done assessing, you analyze your assessments and then you summarize them to form your guided reading groups and pinpoint a focus for your lessons. So when you summarize the assessments, you can put them into a bunch of different categories, including name and level range, knows letters and sounds, identifies sight words, hears sounds and words, uses the meaning, structure, and visual information, matches one-to-one, uses pictures, uses first letters, cross-checks, and cross-checks is the last one. So that is everything on the emergent reader, and this is where we first start the running records, and we'll get more into the running records later. The next stage is the early reader, and the profile of the early reader is that they read at text levels D through I. They know their letters and sounds, but they are still learning how to apply the foundational skills to decode challenging words. They are learning to read and write words that appear frequently in primary texts, and their reading behaviors such as one-to-one matching, using pictures left to right, these are firm. So that means that they're matching, using pictures, and reading from left to right are skills that they should be pretty good at this point. And early readers also become proficient in the following skills and strategic actions as they progress through text levels. Just a couple of them are monitoring for meaning and structure, monitoring for visual information, and rereading. So those are a couple of the more important skills that they will become proficient at in the early reading stage. So assessing the early readers with two main assessments, and the first one is conferencing, and this includes running record and oral retelling. This is one of the most important parts of the assessment for the early reader. Um, it's actually the most important thing. So as all readers, they make mistakes, and these mistakes tell you how the student processes the text. So as a teacher, it's important to analyze these running records to determine which text level they're at and the student how the student corrects themselves and why they make these errors. So we as a teacher can understand why they make it and help them with strategies to overcome those errors. So the number of errors is not as important as determining why they made those errors. So that's why we decide strategic actions that will help accelerate their reading and um, coming up with answers as to why they are making those errors. So, and then the next assessment would be a spelling assessment. And a few quick spelling assessments tells us about the child's understanding of letters, sounds, and words. And we can also analyze the ways children spell words and provide insight as to how they decode. One good way to use these spelling assessments would be using a sight word chart. Another way would be to use a word knowledge inventory or dictated sentence, like we talked about earlier. That would be great for early readers. And lastly, we're going to summarize these assessments. Like we talked about before, some of the main directions for completing these assessments or summaries of the assessments are name and level range, self monitors, if they solve words, if they read fluency, if they how their retelling is, if they spell phonetically, and some other factors that you may consider in your instruction planning. So the next stage is the transitional reader stage. And the profile for a transitional reader is that they read at text levels J through P. They're an extremely and one thing to know about these guys or these group of readers is that they are a pretty diverse group, and some of their specific needs definitely vary throughout. And these students automatically recognize an increasing number of sight words, but often struggle with sophisticated vocabulary, especially multi-syllabic words with complex vowel patterns and endings. So it's important to know that some of these students struggle with more sophisticated words that a normal fluent reader probably wouldn't struggle as much. And some of these students will still need to improve their fluency, while others read so quickly that they just don't comprehend anything that they're reading. Most of these students need word study activities that target complex vowels and inflectional endings, and they all need guided reading lessons that target their needs and teach them strategies for comprehending longer texts. So it's important to note that some of these readers uh, really struggle with comprehension. It's important to note that that is something that they need to work on, and they also need to work on decoding and retelling. And those are some of the most important things to work on for a transitional reader. So when we're assessing these readers, there's two main assessments that we will use for this, and the first one is word knowledge inventory. And this assessment is just a list of words for students to spell, and research has shown that analyzing the ways students can spell provide insight as to how they decode and read words. So this just tells us which students are struggling and which students are struggling and which ones need immediate intervention. So it's important this is a very important assessment in this reading stage because it really tells us which ones are struggling and which ones aren't struggling. So this is a very important one, as is the reading conference. The reading conference is the most important one in every stage because it provides that one-on-one conference with students, and it's important to consider this a investment in their future. During a reading conference, you meet with the student individually to listen to him or her read at a level text. The conference should include a running record on at least 100 words, an oral retelling, and a comprehension conversation guided by questions about the passage. So, this is obviously very important, just like every other reading stage, because that one-on-one time is so important with the teacher and student. And that running record really tells you where they are making their mistakes, and it also helps with why they're making those mistakes, because you are going over the meaning structure and visual part of it. So it tells you why they're making those mistakes. And this is just a picture of what an assessment chart for transitional readers would look like, and it has the name, the level that they're reading at, their monitors for meaning, decodes, fluency, their retelling, and their needs word study. So what they need to work on at the end. So that's just a picture of what an assessment summary chart would look like for a transitional reader. So finally, the last stage is the fluent reader stage. And a profile on them is that these readers gain automaticity with word recognition and develop efficient and flexible word-solving strategies. When they make an error, which to note is rare for this stage, they use meaning and parts of words to quickly self-correct. And although these readers are proficient decoders, they still may need to learn strategies for comprehension. So just because they're a fluent reader doesn't mean that their comprehension will be great. And it's important to explore these deeper levels of comprehension, because like I just said, just because they're a fluent reader doesn't mean they are great at comprehension. And comprehension instruction is part of every guided read lesson, but it takes center stage at the fluent levels. So how we assess a fluent reader would be a word knowledge inventory and an individual conference with a comprehension interview is how we will assess these fluent readers. And for the word knowledge inventory, even though most fluent readers are good spellers, we want to assess their comprehension, like I said, because some of them are great spellers. It doesn't mean that their comprehension is always there. And a word knowledge assessment will identify the word elements that the students need to learn, so in the lessons, you can target what they need to work on, what kind of words and skills they need to work on. So lastly, the reading conference, like it says on the slide, is the most useful assessment. And like I said earlier, this is the most useful because it's that one-on-one time with the teacher. And since fluent readers make such few mistakes, it's important to ask the student to read a few paragraphs out loud to check if it is difficult for them or not. And if it is too easy, then you need to go up. And if it's not, you need to go slightly down a little bit. And after the reading, it's important to have a conversation about the passage and ask questions like, tell me more, or what else happened, or tell me why this happened, and stuff like that to test their comprehension on the passage. And this is just a picture I found that kind of explains what a fluent reader would look like. attention to detail, their pace and rate, comprehension, their accuracy is good. They have good expression in their reading, and these are just signs of a fluent reader. So, in my student teaching placement, I am in a middle school, and although I have not done any reading lessons or observed any reading lessons, um, from what I've just seen throughout the day, I would say I mostly have fluent readers. In my power hour or study hall periods, I have tried to observe the type of books my students have been reading, and most of them are big novels that a fluent reader would read. So, without having any guided reading lessons or seeing any lessons from my teacher or simply not having a reading class, this is just my observation and what I would say my students are, what level my students are reading at. So that is my presentation today on all the reading lessons and how we would assess them and why we would assess them. Thank you.